All righty, welcome back to On Texas Football, a little live stream edition for today's recruiting breakdown. I'm CJ Vogel, joined as always by Gerry Hamilton for the recruiting breakdown and a little pre-national signing day breakdown, Gerry. That's what we're going to hit on today. We're going to be taking all your questions, of course, hitting on some of the biggest news that we've seen break today, as well as some of the updates for some of the top prospects that Texas is still pursuing and chasing after. A lot going on, about 24 hours away from most of these kids and 25 commits committing and signing to the Longhorns and elsewhere. But first, Jared, before we get into it, Texas back up to 23 commits in the 2025 class. They got a big one today. You mentioned it yesterday. You mentioned it this morning again. But Kade Phillips, once again, a member of the Texas 2025 recruiting class. Take us through how that went down and also what Texas is getting in that prospect.
Yeah, huge flip for Texas. Look, 6'2", 180, right around 180, 80-inch wingspan, 10.25-inch hands, 24/7 long jump twice last year as a junior, 21.4 200 qualified for state. Then you put out the senior tape, just tremendous, has risen to be one of the top 35, 40 level prospects in the country. A couple of people even have him as a 5-star. But he is a great talent, and I think an even better culture and team fit in Austin. I think he's a perfect fit in Austin. And look, it's very, you know how much Texas coveted Kade Phillips? He decommitted, went to LSU, flirted with taking a visit, didn't make the visit, and Texas still didn't give up. That's when you know Sark and the staff really like somebody, CJ, because and they should. Here's the senior tape. I mean, he's playing corner, really good job coming downhill. He's gotten bigger, stronger, long limbs you can see there. He plays corner. He plays wide out. He returns kicks for Hightower. He's graduating in December. I talked to him earlier this afternoon just to double check on that graduation, but I make sure it hadn't changed. But he is graduating here this month and will be in Austin January 13th when all the early enrollees report that 13th, 14th. But I think it's a huge win for Texas. And look, that's a 5 DB class. Now you got to get them all signed tomorrow, right? But if all 5 of these guys sign with Texas, that is one hell of a haul. Can I bring this one up real quick? Because we need to kill this quick. William Nish, LSU site said Texas offered Phillips $1 million per year. That's not true at all. I'm not going to say what the number is, but that's now. All right. What's next?
Well, there we go. Yeah, Gerry, I was just going to build on that defensive back class because you're up to 5 right now. Grayson Littleton expected to, and we'll talk about his recruitment here coming up, but expected to sign at 9 a.m. And then you have Jonah Williams, Kade Phillips at 1 p.m. At lunch right after that. Here you go. Thank you, Matthew, again for what's now the 25 recruiting class as well. But Caleb Chester, 11:15, and then we're working to finalize the time for Zaylus Hicks. Of course, Colorado is making a late push for Hicks as well as a number of other programs at the moment. But this defensive back class here, and before we move on, let me get your thoughts holistically on the defensive class. On the defensive side of the ball, we've talked about Smith and Rogbo, Lance Jackson, obviously Elijah Barnes as well. But Texas having to fight and hold on to some of their defensive linemen as of late. But when you compare that and combine that with what's going on in that back end of the secondary, this is the best defensive haul in its entirety for the Longhorns under Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah, no, I think this is a tremendous class of defensive players. I mean, you look at SEC size was Charles and Sharma. And again, Florida isn't going to give up on Charles. I feel good about that. Sharma isn't going to give up on USC. This is what you want. This is, if nobody wants your players, your class is not good. 2 big-bodied, athletic front interior defenders. Elijah Barnes, one of the very best linebackers in the country. That range, that senior tape is tremendous, by the way. And we're going to set 8 hours of live on signing day, 7 to 11 in the morning, then take a lunch break and come back in the afternoon. But we'll run in highlights, puddle highlights on all these guys tomorrow throughout the day. But Elijah Barnes, tremendous. Johnny Cunningham, senior tape is awesome. Kade Phillips, Grayson Littleton, top 100 level kid in the country. Caleb Chester, I think, may have the most football intelligence of anybody on this list. He's going to outplay his ranking. Jonah Williams is a stud. Zaylus Hicks is a stud. Then you have Lance Jackson, Smith, and Rogbo. And the question is, what could you add to that? Can you add a Justice Terry on Friday? Could you add a Javion Hilson? I know what people are saying right now. Can you add those guys? I think Texas is in a pretty good spot for Kellen Wiley. That's another big, rangy linebacker. CJ, this defensive class is really, I've said it before, if all these guys on this list sign tomorrow, and it's just say you added Kellen Wiley only, this is a defensive class that Kirby Smart or Nick Saban would have signed for years. I mean, it'd be nice to add another defensive lineman to this group. No, make no mistake about that. And I think Texas, I think there's a possibility that happens. And we'll see what happens. But Texas is making, Justice Terry, will he leave home? Will he go more than a drive away from home? Because Auburn and Georgia and Texas are where this really coming down to. I think Alabama's still hanging around, but it wouldn't shock me if it didn't come down to Georgia and Texas. But I don't ever want to underestimate Auburn when they're motivated, although Larry Oracle just flipped one of their best guys, Nathan Marshall, but he was out of Chicago, not a deep South defensive lineman.
Right. I mean, it's a heck of a class already. Again, and we've seen it again. I'll touch on it just briefly, but Terry Joseph, Blake Gideon, Steve Sarkisian doing what they do and flipping commits, adding to its class very late in the cycle. We've seen this all 4 years that they've had entire cycles to work with. Xavier Bryce, Larry Turner Gooden, now Terrence Brooks, Kobe Black, Jelani McDonald, all of these late additions, Xavier Phillips-Smith, Wardell Black. It's been continuing again this year. Obviously, Grayson Littleton added to the class last month. And you saw it just now today when Texas poached a 4-star plus, taking your lingo there, Jerry, Kade Phillips from LSU, doing what they do. And they close very strong as well. Texas now sitting top 5 again with 23 commits in the class and looking to add as well. 23 commits in the class. We see it now upwards of 27, perhaps, as the ceiling for this class right now. Of course, this is following the decommitment of John Mills last night, who ended up going back to Washington, where his family had been a bit of a legendary family of sorts in the athletics world for the Washington Huskies, which means there's a spot open on the offensive line per se right now, Jerry, which means we're talking about Michael Fasusi next. And of course, this is one that currently committed to Oklahoma, Texas A&M. He visited College Station last week for the Texas A&M game, but the week before that was down in Austin for the game against Kentucky. What's the latest you're hearing on Michael Fasusi and where the 5-star from Louisville is kind of leaning about 24 hours out from his signing day?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't think A&M is feeling good about that one. It really is going to come down to, and look, late last week, I was told it looked like Texas versus Texas A&M. Well, now Oklahoma has their new OC, and I'm sure they're making their run. But you look, and I'm not saying what Fasusi's going to do. I think there's a path to the field maybe a little earlier there than Texas. Boy, I feel bad for that guy. I've seen this tape like 10 times now. That first clip always makes you feel bad when it's an offensive line class for the poor little guy that got smashed. But is he going to play for an air raid guy? That's my question with Oklahoma. And I know in recruiting, it's multiple. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. Okay. Well, what people have seen is air raid. Is he going to play for an air raid guy? I'll let the chat answer that question. I don't know. Maybe he will. Is Biedenbaugh going to be retained? That would mean he leaves Jared Castor, who's been his offensive line coach, the new hire from Houston Christian to Washington State. Those guys tend to travel together. What's going to happen there? You have two offensive line coaches? Probably not. So I think there's some interesting things going on there. I think Texas has done a really good job in this recruitment this go round. And I look, I've had it at 52% for Texas. I'm not saying I'm right. This is recruiting. If this cycle tells you anything, that this is wild times right now. It's the last cycle before profit sharing, and I think everybody's pedal to the metal while it's still truly the wild, wild west. But I think Texas has done a good job with Fasusi, and we'll see what he does. But I don't think A&M has confidence in it, and I know Oklahoma's fighting until the end, and we'll see if Texas can pull this off because it would be a big one.
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate on if or when you'll see a decision from Ben Arbuckle, the new offensive coordinator for Oklahoma, to see what happens at offensive line, whether it be a retainment of Bill Biedenbaugh. I think right now, I know you want to get your guys that you've coached with for forever, Jerry, as you were mentioning, on your staff, but with the history of development at Oklahoma for Beatonball, I think it would be a bit surprising to see him depart. But we'll see, of course. And that would have a big impact, of course. Going back to the very beginning of when Oklahoma started to become a big player for Michael Fasusi, it was always Beatonball development, that relationship there that kind of overwhelmed the remaining contestants for his recruitment, if that makes sense. So if Oklahoma does move on from Beatonball, that would be significant in this recruitment, 100%. A couple other 5-stars I wanted to get to. The first one down out of San Antonio, and you put up a really interesting note this morning that for Michael Terry III, the 5-star athlete, number 1 athlete in the country, it's not Nebraska Texas has to be worried about right now, but Oregon, who has kind of been a pain in the you-know-what for Texas all cycle long.
Yeah, Joe Z's entered the chat at this point. Look, we're going to hit on that. I want to answer this too on Fasusi because it came in. Could Fasusi not sign the early period? He's an early enrollee. He's graduating from high school in like 3 weeks. I mean, does he technically have to sign this week? No, but he's going to be enrolling somewhere January 13th, 14th, or 15th. On Michael Terry, yeah, there was an interesting update, and I still feel good about Texas. CJ, I think you do too. But Oregon made a big push in the last 24, 36 hours here. I think Garrett McGuire losing his job at Nebraska, it was Texas or Nebraska, but this is actually coming down to Texas and Oregon. But I think Texas is in a good spot here. This will be an upset for me if it went the other way. CJ, upsets happen in this business, but I think Texas has been in a good spot for a while. But anytime Oregon makes a late run, you have to listen and monitor.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. We saw this right before 4th of July, right? When Josiah Sharma felt like was leaning towards Texas, and right before his decision date, he says, actually, it's going to be Oregon. Texas obviously had some time, and they did great work of flipping him back into the Texas class, but there won't be time for that here with Michael Terry. Texas will have to go all the way to the wire here really quickly to make sure that this is a guy that ends up in the class, obviously, with not much time remaining until he signs. He's expected to have a ceremony tomorrow at 8:15 down in San Antonio. And speaking about Terry, Jerry, one more question about Justice Terry, the 5-star defensive lineman. Look, that's a big one. That would be a big one for the Texas Longhorns if they were able to kind of sneak in late to that recruitment, right? They weren't a big player in this recruitment in the spring. They weren't big players in the summer. And then all of a sudden he says, yeah, I'm going to take a visit to Austin. I want to see what it's all about. That's when Texas really got involved here. And that would be more than just about anything other than an SEC championship. That would be a true welcome to the SEC moment if Texas was able to walk in to the conference and steal away the number 1 defensive lineman in all the country.
Yeah, it really would be. And I know I see people in here, Tennessee Longhorn will get Justice Terry. LLs, I'm starting to feel Justice Terry leaning to Texas. We shall see. He will announce Friday at noon. But look, here's the thing with this recruitment. And I think it's never simple in the NIL day and age, but from a recruiting standpoint, it's 3 schools that are a drive for mom versus a school that's not really a drive for mom. And that is a big part of this, I believe, and is what has helped the in-state schools. And why USC was never where he was going to sign. That was just not going to happen. So now the question is, I think Texas has some things going for him in this recruitment, obviously. I think Georgia's felt like they were the leader for a while. That doesn't mean they'll be the leader on Friday, though. They felt like they were leader for a while. Auburn's got the last official visit, and they've had some late confidence. The question comes down to is Kirby's got a lot of D linemen committed. Hell, he may get Kevin Wynn. Kevin Wynn's probably going to South Carolina or Georgia tomorrow. He's still committed to FSU, so technically 3 schools in it. But there's a chance Kevin Wynn could go to Georgia tomorrow. It was looking really good for South Carolina last week, but I think Georgia's trying to make it a run and maybe be a compromise really close to home school there, even though South Carolina is not far from where he lives, but Athens is 40 minutes down the road from family. So we'll see what happens there. So they've got 5 defensive line guys committed, going to be 6, maybe 7 in this class.
Yeah.
But so we'll see what happens. I think Kenny Baker's done a really good job in this recruitment. Kenny being the pass rush coach for Texas, for a guy that is a 5 tech that will probably grow into a 5/3, I think is helpful. But again, I think this one comes down to a lot of these recruitments, not always in the NIL area. There's things with that, right? But where does Mama want him? How far does Mama want him from home? If she can see it, if she can see Texas, then we shall see.
Yeah, absolutely. We shall see. Put it on a shirt, Gerry. But before we get to some of your questions here as well, Gerry, I just wanted to get your last second thoughts on a couple of prospects currently committed or at least considering the Longhorns. First, Grayson Littleton. Looks like Michigan's become a big player here. Michigan, for everybody in the country, essentially, as of the last 2 weeks or so, Michigan becoming a big player there. Clemson not going down quietly. Of course, Littleton was previously committed to Dabo Swinney and the Tigers. Josiah Sharma, we mentioned him on the offset of the show. USC, a school that's hoping, pushing, wanting Josiah Sharma to push back that decision date to sign a little bit later in the week. Again, it was Josiah Sharma, currently committed to Texas. Texas had to fight off Oregon, but that's a West Coast school in which staying home, as you mentioned, just a drive away from mom, although a bit of a long drive down to USC. And then let me get your thoughts here on Kellen Wiley, because obviously uncommitted at the moment. You put out a note yesterday that it felt like Maryland might have been the biggest school to keep an eye on. Since then, Miami, who was considered to be a big threat for Wiley earlier in the cycle, lost a linebacker. Gavin Nix just flipped his commitment from Miami to Oregon. There's Oregon again being a pest for just about anybody in the country. But Kellen Wiley, is it down to those three? How much of a threat will Miami be later? And what's the latest on the Texas front?
On Kellen Wiley, I was told yesterday, and nothing's changed. Nobody sent me an update on this from a really good source from this recruitment. It says Texas or Maryland. And I think he's announcing at 10 in the morning. I have to double check that time. I feel good about Texas there, barring a late change. I mean, a late change. I feel good about Texas and Kellen Wiley right now. So, that would how the hell did Maryland jump Miami? I think Miami canceled all those official visits that last home game weekend, and that turned some people off. I'll say that. I'll say that. And Miami's doesn't have great late momentum here. I mean, Hilton Stubbs flipped to Florida from Miami, the safety out of Jacksonville Mandarin, teammate and friend of Jamie French. Then obviously Gavin Nix flipped to Oregon. So Miami's they're not running on fumes, but they're not running with momentum late either. They were never able to get in on Myron Charles late. So they're kind of up against it a little bit. I feel good about Texas and Wiley right now.
Well, good deal. I wanted to go back just a little bit because today we've also seen some big
news.
I
forgot CJ. I forgot Grayson Littleton. I think it's only Michigan that is trying, really going after him. I think Texas feels pretty good about it, but you got to at least look at the Michigan way right now with what they're doing late, just to make sure. But it's Michigan that would be the team that would pull the upset over Texas for Littleton, which is the two schools he visited prior to committing to Texas.
Good point. Good point. Of course, Michigan red hot on the recruiting trail as well.
Yes.
And look, we'll talk maybe a little bit of portal if we have time towards the end, because there's been some A&M entries. We were expecting some Oklahoma entrants, and LSU right now getting hit pretty significantly in the portal. But I wanted to bring up this question from King Kunter right here. With Lamont Rogers flipping to the Aggies, does that put us in a better position for Michael Fasusi, or does that just push back his commitment date? Of course, Lamont Rogers just flipped from Missouri to Texas A&M. A&M thought to be in the running for Michael Fasusi, but Gerry, you mentioned earlier, feels like right now it's either going to be sticking with Oklahoma or Texas for Michael Fasusi when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think that's where this is headed. I think it would be – I just don't think A&M has high hopes there. And they flipped Lamont Rogers. I mean, they did lose an interior guy, center Connor Carty, just decommitted from A&M, which is of note. But, yes, I mean, I think the Fasusi thing is going to be really interesting because the new OC, bright, talented guy from Texas, from Canadian Texas in the Panhandle, he's been an air raid guy. And so does that change things with Fasusi as an offensive tackle that his ultimate goal is to be an NFLer? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can get to the NFL from there, but is that a better scheme and development of you as an offensive lineman versus Kyle Flood and Sark's offensive scheme? I think we'll have to see which way Fasusi goes on that. But I think there's been some optimism in Austin for a few days prior to Oklahoma announcing their new offensive coordinator. And the other part with that Oklahoma offensive coordinator, is he going to leave his offensive line coach, Jared Castor, behind? Because he went with him from Houston Christian to Washington State. Maybe Washington State makes him the OC. By the way, he's a former air raid offensive lineman at Texas Tech, by the way. So I don't know how that recruiting pitch goes over if he's the offensive line coach. I mean, that will be interesting to see. So I think there's been some optimism in Austin, but now that Oklahoma has their new OC, we'll see what that pitch looks like to Fasusi here coming up. And asking, could Fasusi just push it back? I mean, anything's possible, but he's set to enroll in January, so he doesn't have a lot of time to play with.
Yeah, it's a good point. Of course, another side note, Texas Tech will be now looking for a new OC as well. Zach Kitley taking the FAU job, which was previously Tom Herman. But back to the world of recruiting here. We got a super chat from Aloha Traveler. Thank you very much for the super chat. Aloha, fellas. Here's a Tuesday stat for you. The Texas defense has more interceptions than touchdowns allowed, 18-13, pretty significant. And then if you guys had to bet, how many 5-stars does Texas end up in the class? I believe there's 4 right now in the composite when you add the new commitment of Kade Phillips. Of course, Jerry, where's this ending up? Because you got 3, maybe 4 that you're in contention with at the moment. Is there a way that Texas maybe sets its own program record for 5-stars this year?
By the way, I like how Aloha Horn buttered us up with that. The first thing that asked about the 5-stars. That's good. That's smart super chatting. I mean, I would say it's at least 50-50 to add one more.
Yeah. Look,
if Texas adds 2 more 5-stars, all these shows are going to be like high fives for 2 months. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
It's going to be tough. If they had 2 more, Jerry, I'm looking at the 2026 class thinking, how would they be able to top that?
Yeah, it'd be tough.
That's a heck of a class. But
let's go through the class scenarios real quick, because that's a good lead into that. Right now, so Texas is 3 or 4, depending on what you look at. I personally think Texas is 3 right now. So if you just say, okay, you added Michael Terry and Kellen Wiley. Just say, and we're throwing out scenarios. We're not saying it's a done deal. We're playing the what if game so I can set up tomorrow. If Texas were to add, let's just say Michael Terry or Hilson, because they're those high 4-star plus guys, plus guys, and Kellen Wiley. So one of those 2 guys plus Wiley, I think Texas is a solid 2. Then it gets down to Michael Fasusi. If you went out for Fasusi, you're going to be 1. But Justice Terry announces Friday. So could Georgia retake 1? It's kind of funny how it's playing out, because, CJ, you're flying out to Atlanta for a big game on Saturday. The big recruiting game is the same 2 teams for the number 1 class, in my opinion, unless Auburn pulls off. Now, they lost Nathaniel Marshall, so that may push them out. If Auburn got flipped Naeem Offord, the in-state 5-star corner from Ohio State, which I do think is possible, and they upset Georgia and probably Texas for Justice Terry, then add 2 5s late, maybe Auburn gets into that picture. But it really feels like, to me, if Texas wins out for Terry and Kellen Wiley, that Georgia and Texas are battling for the number 1 class like they're battling for the SEC championship Saturday and a bye in the college football playoff. Holy hell, it's coming down to all this, isn't it?
Just where you want to be if you're Texas, though. I mean, Georgia was the blueprint. It's been, quote-unquote, the gold standard from the last 8 years, is, I believe, what Sarkisian said earlier. So right where you want to be, and you're doing so from the very beginning of your SEC tenure, which should be a selling point and is a selling point right now in this recruiting pitch at the moment. One more super chat, Jerry. This is from Jerry's Jack Links. As good as the secondary is this year, it's only the beginning. The next few years will be great. We're just getting started. Of course, this comes on the heels of Kade Phillips flipping back into the Texas class. Now you got 5 in the class with Grayson Littleton, Caleb Chester, you got Zayless Hicks, and 5-star Jonah Williams. When you combine that and compare that with what Texas was able to bring in 2024, Jerry, how encouraging is this secondary haul over the last 2 cycles for the future?
Yeah, big time. If all 5 of these guys sign tomorrow, this is a big-time class because, Grayson Littleton, I think it could be a phenomenal nickel. And he can play corner, but I think he could be really good at nickel. And two big SEC physical safeties, and Zealous Hicks will be a 6'2", 200-pound guy. You saw him last week, CJ. I mean, he's a big kid for a kid that just reclassed to 2025.
Yeah.
You're going to have two 200-plus pound safeties. Hicks probably around 200. Jonah will probably be 210, 215 when it's all said.
And they can move.
And they can move. And then you have Kade Phillips, who's one of the elite athletes in the country at defensive back. And Caleb Chester, I'm here to tell you, CJ, I think you were on one of the shows with Caleb Chester when he literally broke down his whole huddle tape like he was a college football coach. Like it was like a coach in film room breaking down a player. Caleb Chester has very, very high-end football intelligence. He's going to outplay his ranking. This would be a tremendous secondary class. And you put it with last year, because Santana Wilson's getting some good reviews in his redshirt year. You've seen Jordan Johnson rebel. Kobe Black's come on, right? Later in his freshman season. Phil Sami's got a ton of talent as well. So it would be, and Wardell Mack, you mentioned, that would be pretty solid.
Yeah, that's 10 really, really impressive prospects for this Texas secondary, of course. And now you get to kind of pick and choose where the development goes amongst everybody as well. Gerry, one portal question from you. This comes from Jay Lee. Thank you for the super chat. Texas still needs a tight end in the portal, right?
What do you think, CJ? I don't. Let's tie this in. Somebody's asked about Nick Townsend a couple of times. I feel good about that. I feel good about Nick Townsend. I talked to him last night. I feel good about that. Now, he's not a midterm enrollee either. So, all right, CJ, what do you think about a portal tight end?
I think it all comes down – if Texas takes a portal tight end, I think it's in the spring after spring football. I think Texas probably sat around and really wanted to go after Ben Urasek last year, who ended up at Georgia, the tight end out of Stanford. They were in from the kid out of Notre Dame originally as well. And I think they sat back and said, look, we want to run the two tight end set maybe a little bit more than we thought. But Juan Davis came along. You had Gunnar Helm, who took the big step. Right now, who's going to be that number one guy? Could it be a Jordan Washington who takes a big leap? Will it be the instant impact of a Nick Townsend immediately? I would lead towards no, just from what we've seen historically with young Texas tight ends. But I think it all comes down to what kind of progression we've seen from Jordan Washington. And, of course, who knows what next step a Spencer Shannon takes as a guy who's been in the system multiple years, Gerry. But I lean towards no.
And Nyblack. What is Nyblack back for year two? If he's like, I lean to no, because I think Jordan Washington's going to be a really good player next year. I mean, Jeff Banks called him star in the making early in camp. You don't say that about somebody you're not planning on having a huge role next year. And so if Nyblack comes back, Spencer Shannon as a blocker, but I'm here to tell you, Nick Townsend's going to play next year. And Nick Townsend's a freaking stud.
He's too physical not to. He already has it here, Gerry, which I think is kind of that bridge that most tight ends have to go through to get on the field early. But I'm with you 100%.
He has SEC physicality blocking in high school right now, and it's because it's also because he's such a high level defensive player, and he lays the lumber at linebacker. There aren't many tight ends that are physically ready to answer the bell in terms of physicality on contact in the SEC. I think Nick Townsend's one of those rare ones. And, oh, by the way, he just happens to probably run 10.85 this spring at 235 pounds.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Real quick, Gerry, we got a lot of chats loading up right now. You just mentioned Nick Townsend. Still pretty safe about where he's at in the class?
I feel good about that. If I'm wrong, y'all will rip me. I feel good. And
then as for the other tight end, Amari Winston, I've yet to hear anything that leads me a different direction at the moment.
Yeah, I think FSU's probably trying to make a run because he visited UCF because of Gus Malzahn, a relationship he had there, because I think he'd been on Auburn's campus very early, right, in his recruitment. So we'll see what happens. If something weird happened, it would probably be with FSU with Amari Winston, but I'm not saying it is. I'm just thinking of a school that would be trying to recruit him late that's kind of close to home. That would be the one with Malzahn going to be the OC at FSU.
Of course. And then Texas will be on the road this weekend in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. They are the home team. Does that mean recruits can come to Atlanta? As far as I know, I don't believe that's.
I don't think so. I don't think so for conference championship games. Now that, I mean, if you want to buy your ticket, yeah, but you can't.
Yeah.
I don't think they can host.
Hey, there's a couple of recruits in the Peach State for Texas. Might as well come on down, right? And then can Texas get to 4 defensive linemen this late in the class? I think that's pretty interesting. Of course, considering where they're at, of course, you got to hold on to your guys.
The odds are you would end up with 3, but you got to hold on. Like you said, you got to hold on to 2 you have. Because Florida's not giving up on Charles, and USC is not giving up on Sharma. Those will be recruiting. They will be recruit. Nobody will know for sure until they sign them tomorrow. I mean, that's the whole deal. Is you got to get those signatures for Texas to feel comfortable with those recruitments because they know these are real battles. Texas has 2 of the interior defensive linemen in the country committed, and one's in Florida and one's in California. So it's going to be battles all the way till the end. Somebody asked about the tight end that committed to A&M, Kade Armstrong. I love Kade Armstrong. I think he's going to play in the NFL. I think he's really good. He is. I don't know if you asked if he's solid. He's solid with A&M.
I got one more for you, and then we'll do a quick recap and get out of here because I know you got a lot of calls to make before signing day comes up. But on the topic of Michael Terry, where do you see him right now? I know he's been a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end, kind of the H-back picture in the next level. Is that just a wait and see, or do you have a vision for him off the top?
I think it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit of a wait and see on him. He wants a chance at wide receiver, but he's not. Look, I don't think that's a demand. He'd just like a chance at it. I think he's open to wherever gives him the opportunity to be the best player. He's not. Hey, look, he liked the idea of Oregon recruiting at running back for a while. He's not adverse to being an H-back, running back, guy that plays in the slot, plays in the flex, flexes out. He's not adverse to. I mean, he's fine with all that. So I think he could just be a offensive weapon for Steve Sarkisian if he signs with Texas tomorrow. Hey, by the way, before we get to our last kind of chats, questions, and comments, I want to take a second for our sponsor, Mark Saunders, Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders. Thank you for being the sole sponsor of the Recruiting Breakdown when it comes to protecting all your stuff. Wouldn't it be great to have one place that protects it all? Here's some great news, Texas fans, as I cough. Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders, the only insurance agent you'll need to help keep tabs on protection for all your stuff. Everything from your home, car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, and ATV. Call Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders' office today, 512-218-8571.
Of course, here's one last one about Micah Hudson out of the portal. Could Texas go after him? Sure, they could. Right now, I lean towards no. Again, Texas, in the way that they've attracted and kind of gone after portal wide receivers, all of these guys that Texas has brought in either have multiple years of starting experience or they've come off of a year in which they've had tremendous production. Isaiah Nayor at Wyoming had 1,000 yards. A.D. Mitchell, a guy who had 4 touchdowns in 4 college football playoff games. And then we've talked about it for about a year and a half now with Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden, what they've done at previous stops as well. 8 catches for Micah Hudson, as talented as he is, it just doesn't convey to what Texas has had previously as well.
And I always want to say this, CJ. Texas went after Wingo and not Hudson the first go-round. I'm just leaving that there. David Rawls asked a good one. Is there a recruit considering Texas nobody's talking about? Yes. But I'm not saying it's going to happen. But it is a yes.
Well, there we are. That's one little cliffhanger to leave you with. Of course, I've been watching Lost lately, Jerry, and they've perfected the art of the cliffhanger. So that's a pretty good job right there. One last question. We'll get out of here, Jerry. Who's the most underrated signing Texas has had since Sark was hired? You don't have to leave or, add in the overrated one there, but anybody that you're looking at that's, really glad and fortunate Texas was able to add this player, maybe minus some of the hoopla that came with it.
Most underrated signing.
I think it's a pretty easy one this year.
Go ahead.
I think you look at Trey Wisner, a guy who's
good one.
Where would Texas be without him, considering the injuries at the running back position and his production recently? That wasn't a guy that was as celebrated as maybe even the top 10, 15 guys in his class. But my goodness, he's certainly lived up to the billing. Michael Taft.
Michael Taft was a walk-on, so that one doesn't count. What would you do with Cam Williams? Because there were some blockheads in our industry that had that guy 87 mid 3-star. Show yourself to the door, please. Because of his ranking, would he be the guy? Because he's going to be a first-round pick.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
How about in the future when maybe this question in 2 years it may be Ty Anthony Smith?
I like that too. That late split for A&M.
Star guy for people. That dude's going to play in the NFL if he stays healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the best part about this is this conversation could go on and on because of the development that this staff has brought to us, Gerry. But that will do it for today's recruiting breakdown. Of course, thank you, Mark Saunders, for sponsoring the recruiting breakdown for Gerry Hamilton and myself. You can find all the latest recruiting updates and details over at ontexasfootball.com. For Matthew behind the scenes, thank you very much for all that you do, my friend. This has been a little recruiting breakdown. Of course, signing day coming tomorrow. Gird up your loins, fellas, because it's going to be a good one.